Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Omnia Performance Podcast, where today we are going to be discussing the benefits of cycling for running. Running is very popular at the moment. Cycling is also quite popular at the moment, and I believe the pathway is well trodden. A lot of recreational runners will potentially eventually become recreational cyclists, and both have pros, both have cons. But I think the key thing at the moment is that there is so much gain to be had from utilising cycling as a modality to support running rather than viewing cycling in and of itself. And we both have experience within that. So today I'm joined by Kieran, who has got really quite fast on his feet as a result of being really quite fast on two wheels recently. And I will share my experience returning to running post-injury and just how much fitness was held on to by keeping things ticking over on the bike. Before we dive into all that, however, it would be very rude of you not to hit follow or subscribe at this point. Thank you very much. Please do check us out on all video platforms as well, as we have a big focus on that. So Instagram Reels, clips, and then YouTube main episodes and lots of shorts and other things there too, as well as a fortnightly series where we focus on what our athletes are doing. We go to them, we interview them, we film them training, we edit it together very nicely, and we put it on the internet for your viewing pleasure. So go and check that out as well, please. Thank you very much. So, Kieran, gun to your head, running or cycling, you can only do one for the rest of your life. Which one does it go?
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it is cycling now.
Whoa. Interesting. I think my answer is running. I kind of put a gun to my own head there as I asked that, and I think the answer is running, just for convenience. But you explain. So, why cycling over running now? That's clearly a recent change.
So, couple for me. One, it is just easier on my body. I'm feeling less aches and pains, and I'm performing very well in the gym from sort of lower running volume, higher cycling volume. And the second is the fun aspect for me. So there's multiple aspects to what makes cycling fun. For me, I love going fast. I love fast descents, and I love the feeling of if you're suffering in the red zone on running, you feel like you're going very fast, but you're not. You're not actually moving very fast at all. If you're sitting in the red zone cycling, you could very easily be clipping along at 50k an hour, more if you're going downhill. You can just be going so fast, the exhilaration is just so fun. And then the other aspect for me is the exploration. If you want to explore 100 kilometers of countryside, that is, if you're doing that on your feet, that is multiple months or years of training for most people, and probably weeks of recovery. Most people would take that very seriously. Whereas a 100k jaunt out on the bike is extremely casual. You could probably do it before breakfast for a lot of people. So the ability to go out and see the world is just so much easier on the bike. And for me, I just love that. And I've really, really fallen in love with the bike the past sort of 2-3 years.
I agree with everything you've said, but then I get a puncture and I go, fuck this, I prefer running. So, yeah. No, I think this is probably influenced by the fact that I travel so much. Is nothing ruins bike riding more than things going wrong with the bike, and the more variables you add, as with anything, the more things can go wrong. And I've been traveling with my bike a little bit recently, and my seat post has been knocked out of shape and things like that, which I actually discovered on the turbo on Saturday when I looked back at a video and thought, wow, that's not how I normally look on a bike. Something is wrong here. But the convenience of running is fantastic. But you are correct. The exploration that comes with the bike is wonderful, and the ease that comes with it sometimes until you get a puncture is also wonderful. Higher cost to entry, of course, but I think is a very, very valuable thing to do. And socially, I get so much value from group rides, coffee and cake stops, all of that stuff now as I'm getting a bit older. I always have, to be fair, but I think I just appreciate it in the moment a little bit more. It just takes a little bit of the intensity away from any road running focused metrics. Even with ultras, you want to keep moving, whereas a bike, you can sit down and enjoy that coffee and cake without feeling rushed, depending on who you're riding with, of course. But we're not here to talk about guns to our heads. We are here to talk about the benefits of cycling. And I think we've already failed in this podcast, entirely by my own direction, just to take ownership of that one, because we viewed cycling and running as two things that have to be viewed as separate, when in reality, I don't believe that they do. They can complement one another in a wonderful way, and I don't think should be viewed as factions or things that have to be delineated. Cycling can support running, running can support cycling. You can do both concurrently. You can do one to support the other. You can do neither. You can do one or the other. Those are the options. I guess that is the full list. But we've both, for different reasons recently, experienced the benefit of cycling to our running more so than we have done previously. We've obviously always known theoretically how much of a benefit there is, and we've always implemented it into our cycling from a cross-training point of view. But I, by design through injury, have had to spend a lot more time on the bike and a lot less time on my feet than I ordinarily would, and have yielded interesting results. And you have spent a lot more time racing and enjoying riding the bike and less time running because of your goals, which has also yielded interesting results. So why don't you share with us that context? Because you've recently hit a all-time 10-kilometer PB, which is very, very spicy for someone of your body weight and deadlift strength. Just general strength, in fact. Saw you close grip bench pressing 100 kilo for 5 this morning. Very nice indeed. And I do pay attention, Kieran. Don't you worry about that. And you're shifting on your feet. But if you looked at your Strava data, it's not. It's a little bit atypical of what would have yielded a big 10-kilometer PB. So yeah, share with us your experience recently.
So I guess the context here is that I've been running an awful lot longer than cycling. I've been running best part of 12 years, many years before I joined the army. And if anything, it's probably a big part of why I joined the army, because I loved that kind of thing. And I only took up cycling initially to help support that. So I just wanted the ability to get an extra session in. And when I was training for P Company, I bought a cheap turbo and a second-hand bike, and it just gave me an extra session a week of non-impact. And I kind of put it away after that. I didn't really come back to it until getting a bit more into things in the army. It's a very popular sport. People just love to go out for cycles on the weekend and compete. There's a lot of options to do things like crit racing in the army. So it was kind of just natural that I came back to it. And so I've been cycling sort of about 3 years now. And what really sort of kicked things off for me was that I changed posting, and I was essentially very close to the Surrey Hills, which for anybody in Britain will know is essentially the home of road cycling in the south of England. It's just beautiful. There's a huge amount of climbing, huge amount of cycling infrastructure. It's just a place to be. And so it was only natural that I started riding more. Now, a bit of additional context was that last year was probably the single busiest year of my life, because I was still running my own business at this point. I was also doing a degree part-time. I had a busy job in the army, and I was also preparing to leave the army. So quite frankly, training was the lowest priority for me that it's ever been in my entire training history. And I was only running an absolute maximum of 10 or 15 kilometers a week. And if push came to shove, if I only had time to choose one session, I was going with the one I enjoyed more, and that was cycling. So if it was a choice between a 2-hour run or just get out on the bike and go up Box Hill for a little bit, I was going to choose the bike every single time. And so it meant over the past year, I've been riding the bike quite a bit more. And I also took part in my first crit season, which meant for the most of spring and summer, I was getting at least one really hard effort in, like truly maximum effort redlining at least once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. And then once a week, I was just going out for a long, hilly, reasonably hard ride on the weekends. And that was it. It was just sort of 2 structured cycles or non-structured cycles a week, really. One race, one just sort of training, trying to find something steep, go up it and push myself hard. And that was all I was doing. And a couple of my friends were going for a 10K over at Battersea Park. And I invited myself last minute. I was like, you know what? Sounds fun. I'll come. And I had absolutely no right to run a 10K PB, particularly at my body weight. As I said, I was only running about 10 kilometers a week, 10 to 15 kilometers a week for the past 6 months. And my 10K PB went from 39:30, which was obviously a reasonably fast time for somebody at 90 kilos body weight and pretty strong, all the way down to 37:10. And honestly, I just could not have predicted that. I knew I was feeling fit from the bike. All my runs were going well. And I thought I was on for a PB. Like maybe I would dip into 38:59. And the only reason I ran that fast was because the GPS under the trees at Battersea Park was bonkers. And I didn't know what pace I was running at. I felt good, so I was trying to push under sub 38 and across the line in 37:10, absolutely bewildered at what just happened. I genuinely couldn't believe, one, that I'd been able to do that, and two, or most importantly, that I'd been able to do that on such low running volume. And it really, really changed for me how I viewed the bike. And we've spoken about it a lot since, about just how powerful that has been. And in my own goals now, I don't really have any running events in the calendar. There's nothing that I really care about that much with running right now. I'm pushing the bike really hard, and I still feel really good whenever I go out for a run. So again, running volume is also remaining low, but the bike is keeping me ticking over there as well. So huge amount of carryover for me.
Nice. I think from my point of view, the big turning point's been obviously very, very aggressive marathon prep. From January to the end of May, I, for the first time ever, really sort of focused on a higher volume approach, because it's something that I'd never actually experimented with. And I'd always had this little bit of a tail off in any sort of tempo or sub-threshold pacing, which I'd always put down to two things, really, which is blood occlusion and inherent inefficiency by having a higher body weight that doesn't come from height, it comes from short femurs. So my stride relative to my body weight is way off, because a lot of heavier runners can bounce out with a slightly longer stride length, whereas mine is quite choppy because I have short femurs and more body weight that needs to move. So the blood occlusion that comes from that, because if you plug data into a VDOT curve, I've ran a 4:53 mile, I've ran a 18:10 5K, all at around 205 pounds body weight. If you plug those data, that data into a VDOT curve, then in theory, as you track up it, the informed data through general running population says you should be able to run about this. Wherever, in fact, if I combine them both, it's always been a bit of a tail off towards the end when I've been trying to sort of mimic and sort of train for that VDOT curve. So I experimented with a higher volume approach for this marathon prep, and things were going really, really, really well. I had made a huge amount of progress and was actually targeting 252, 253 based on the data in training. My peak week session, so I think my peak week was 70 miles, and my peak session was 5K warm-up, 20-something K, 22K maybe at race pace, and then a 5K cool down. And the middle section, I hit, it was 24K maybe. Either way, it was between 20 and 25K was the range I've got in my head. And I hit that at 4:05 per kilometres and 4:05 per kilometre pace, and my heart rate never went above 158, which just felt amazing. I felt so smooth. I was kind of a bit lost for words at how good I felt at the end of a big volume training week. The legs felt snappy, fresh, everything was in a good place, and I was like, you know what, we're in a really good place. The data indicated as well, had I kept running at my zone 2 pace to finish that session off, I could have ran sub 3 that day. However, I woke up on the Monday morning and couldn't lift my left leg. So before I even got to the start line of my marathon, which was 3 weeks on from that point, we've since discovered I had a stress response in my left hip, which means that, things didn't unfold in the way that I'd hoped they did. But I ultimately experimented with something new to try and push my personal limits and paid a price. First serious injury that I've had in 10 years. I'm not the first person to get a stress fracture running, and I certainly won't be the last. But the amount of value that I gained from training that way was huge. However, also some very valuable lessons in terms of pushing it right to the wire and then getting a sort of a smack in the face as a result is very useful for future training. But that's the context. So end of May, I had not ran until the first week of September. So that is June, July, August. Yeah, basically 12 weeks. It was the 13th week that I ran, and I ran 3K pain-free, which was great. But I had not done a single run after that, but I'd done a huge amount of time on the turbo and then a lot of time outdoors on the bike once I was signed off to do so with my hip recovery. And my first 3K was done at 4:58 per kilometre pace at 1:44 heart rate. And on the Sunday just gone, we are, what's the date today? We are the 6th of October? 7th of October today.
7th, yeah.
I ran a half marathon at 1:41 heart rate at 4:53 per kilometre pace, which I'm very, very pleased with and felt great. Musculoskeletally, bit challenging, as we discussed on the last podcast, but the key detail is that aerobically, I felt fantastic. I, prior to that marathon prep, had never touched sub 5 minute Ks at zone 2 heart rate zones. The marathon prep has got that efficiency higher. The cycling has kept it. And that's something I really, really want to highlight, is prior to the marathon prep that I had from January to May, my zone 2 pacing would have been about 5:15 to 5:30 per kilometre, and had been for about 5 years. It's documented on YouTube, it's documented on here. You can see it, it's all there, the information's all there. I'd worked towards a 4:53 mile, I'd done faster 5Ks, and it had never really dropped below that 5:15, 5:30. I got to about 4:45 per kilometre as my zone 2 pacing with the marathon prep, and then I stopped running for 3 months. I continued cycling, I continued swimming, and I actually ramped up my volume cycling, ramped up the intensity cycling a little bit, but there really wasn't a huge amount of tempo, sub-threshold, sweet spot training stuff on the bike. There was just volume and turning my heart over and just sitting, moving comfortably. Once I got back to running, felt a little bit alien, gait felt a little bit out of practice, but the pacing, the data, and the heart rate efficiency was pretty much exactly the same. And that for me is fascinating off the back of a very valuable lesson with the marathon prep, but a very, very valuable lesson off the back of it is I wonder now, and this is something that I'll figure out in the future, so let's bookmark this for me to come back to, how much of the additional volume that I was doing during my marathon prep that got me the progress in my running ability could have been replaced with time on the bike to yield the same result, therefore reducing the impact and therefore potentially reducing the likelihood or the outcome of a grade 2 stress response in my left hip. So that's something that I'm thinking on quite aggressively, but it is just so reassuring to know that when you do the work once with any training modality, you bring the baseline ceiling up higher. So even if you stop doing it for a while, it's higher than when you started doing it the first time round. But you can get massive supplemental benefit from cross-training across the board. And it's really reassuring to know that if you do face an injury that stops you running or cycling or swimming, you can maintain a lot of the baseline ability through pivoting into something new, which from an injury reframing point of view is really, really valuable because people can often place a lot of their personality into one thing, and that can become very psychologically demanding as well as physically demanding during an injury recovery period. For me, it was disappointing, but I viewed it as an opportunity to pivot. Really enjoyed being out on the bike. I was a little bit prepared to be battered egotistically with my first run back because I thought, wow, this is going to be weird to realize that you went from 4:45 per kilometre pace at 140 heart rate to what's it going to be, 5:30, 6, and feel terrible. And actually, this feels a little bit sluggish. I feel heavy on my feet, but my heart's turning over at pretty much the same as it was before. I just feel a little bit out of practice, and that is down to the bike. So I've never, by choice, removed running entirely to see what the bike does to support it, but by reality, with injury this time round, I have experienced that. And I can testify to the fact that cycling is a fantastic supportive mechanism to our baseline running ability. I personally will continue to explore that threshold and that balancing act as I train for 10 Ironmans and 10 days and 10 cities. And I'm going to actually reduce my overall running volume in that prep to better manage impact as I get a bit lighter as well, because if I'm in a calorie deficit, having recovered from a stress fracture and my running volume increases, then I'm going to increase the chance of it happening again through REDs or something like that, potentially if I hit levels of fatigue that are going to affect me physically and increase chance of injury. But that's much less likely with time on the pool and time on the bike and a reduced overall training volume on the run. So were I previously aiming for a certain amount of running volume to prepare myself for what I've got coming in 2026, I'd probably rely a little bit more heavily on the bike volume going into it than I will the run volume. And that's been a very valuable lesson for me personally, something that we've taken and applied, having consulted with other athletes as well and sort of looked at the data with Dr. Phil and things like that, into our strengthened 50-miler and strengthened 100-mile plans, because we've both empirically experienced the massive carryover, as long as there is specificity, using the less is more principle to the areas of running that are not being impacted specifically with the cycling. If you can keep those taking over and keep building the volume on the bike, you will continue to move the needle forwards in an upward curve. And I think that's where, if you are a runner, especially if you're a hybrid athlete, runner focused, then some of your volume, you will elicit the same response with zone 2 cycling as you would zone 2 running, but zone 2 cycling comes with a lot less impact and therefore potentially more sustainability over time, because every stride that we run comes with a transient impact load, which can overspill at a certain point and potentially lead to injury. And the heavier you are, the more impact that goes through each stride, the faster you try and move, the more that's accentuated and accelerated, so it becomes a finer balancing act. It's not inherently dangerous, so to speak, but it's just something that we need to be aware of. And as somebody who's recently probably overspilled that with the volume equation, I'm glad that I did, because it's taught me some very, very valuable lessons, and I have taken the piss. I was due an injury, let's be honest. I think it's been really, really illuminating for me to understand the impact of cycling on the back end, and so reassuring to know that it's done such a good job of maintaining my baseline running fitness.
I think the question, obviously we're talking about the threshold of where the balance is. It's really interesting because we've also got our own little case study in our little run together during your marathon prep, where one of the other aspects I didn't mention was obviously I was deployed 11 times in 12 months in my final year in the army. So I was barely running. And obviously on the weeks where I was in camp, the last thing I wanted to do was go out and do more running. I wanted to enjoy my sessions. So when we went out for that run, obviously it was a bit of a zone 2 warm up, and then it was 3-kilometer blocks, wasn't it? At goal pace. It was a fairly hefty session. It was something like that, wasn't it?
I think it was big. It might have been 6. It might have been 6-kilometer blocks.
I think it might be.
No, it was definitely it was 3 by 4. I think it was longer than 3. I feel like, it was 12 kilometers. I think it was 3 by 4 kilometer blocks.
That sounds about right, because all I remember was that this run in particular was more than
3 by 3 miles. 3 by 3 miles. That's what it was. Yes,
yeah.
There we go.
Because it was that run was more than my entire weekly volume averaged for the past 6 months. That one individual run, and I remember going into it in that when I was running, I was hitting an interval session, often just as part of unit PT or with my recruits, and then perhaps one other easy run just as part of PT. So I had the base pace to run with you, and the first 2 intervals went really well. And then that final one, you start to see the lack of durability in. Obviously, I had no durability at that pace because I'd done no training volume really. I had the ability to run that pace and hold it, and the base aerobic fitness was there. But it's that really interesting point of I was definitely below the tipping point where I was doing too little running volume to truly sort of push into a half marathon or right then in that moment, I probably would have ran a rapid 10K and would have really underperformed relative to my fitness in something like a half marathon, because I wouldn't have had that durability at pace and that specificity. And we saw it perfectly there, where obviously, even though I completed the interval at pace with you, it was obvious that was going to be the last one, wasn't it? Whereas, quite frankly, for you,
I was actually quite pissed off on the second rep, because I was like, why the fuck is Kieran keeping up with me so well here, given that I am training specifically for this thing and he is not? And then when you were tailing off aggressively in rep 3, I was like, okay, balance is restored, thank goodness. Yeah. Fantastic example. So I think if we were to distill down a few takeaways from this, just so it's not our personal anecdotes that we're reflecting on, I think subbing in 1 or 2 zone 2 sessions a week, cycling versus running, could be a good thing to experiment with, just to see how you feel, see if there's a noticeable improvement in your overall perception of fatigue, if there's a noticeable improvement in your performance at heart rate zones with your tempo, your intervals, certain sessions during the week with your running. If you're in a season where you don't need as much running specific volume, then it could be a good opportunity to ease off and reduce the running frequency in place of a few cycling options. C2 bike, watt bike, I generally avoid a run-of-the-mill gym spin bike because they're kind of a weird position, generally speaking, in terms of gait and movement. But don't be afraid of utilising a bike as a way to elicit the same sort of adaptive response for your running. And also, I'm biased with this one, but I think it's a fantastic opportunity to spend some time learning a new skill, being a student, spending some time with some people that spend more time on bikes than they do on their feet, and going on some wonderful coffee and cake adventures if you do decide to buy yourself an actual bike that you can ride outdoors, because it gives me a huge amount of joy, gives me a huge amount of value, and has had a massive training response. So any final thoughts, Kieran?
I think the only one that might be worth mentioning is that the barrier to entry is obviously it's there, but it's slightly less than most people might imagine. That obviously if you're listening to this and you want to take part in cycling, you do not need a $5,000 bike. You just don't. And even if you
I did my first Ironman on a 720-pound commuter bike, and got through it. I was very uncomfortable because I didn't know that bike fits were a thing. I didn't even know that $5,000 bikes existed, really. I didn't really believe that was a concept that would ever make sense. But it's my first Ironman, my first 100-mile ride, my first 50-mile ride was all done on a 725-pound bike, for context.
Yeah, There's so much to be had either second hand, or if you can stretch to about £1,000, there are plenty of brands. So Van Rysel and Canyon both have fantastic starter bikes for sort of 900 quid, and then obviously you just get your helmet and your shoes and you're good to go. Like that's genuinely all you need to get started. It's a bike and a helmet. You don't necessarily need fancy cycling shoes to get started. As long as you have something to ride and you're going to be safe doing it, you can get by and you can have an incredible time, and you can decide whether or not this is a sport you want to invest more time in. And then if you
rather than spending £5,000 on a bike, realizing you don't like it, and then having to shift that bike at a huge loss on Facebook Marketplace after 6 months, which, if you are in the market for a bike, is a great thing to be on the receiving end of. However, if you get peer pressured into buying a very shiny, expensive bike the first time around and discover you don't actually really like it, then you are the person that's creating bargains for people on Facebook Marketplace. So the pendulum swings both ways, I guess, but yeah, very good point to finish on. Wonderful. Okay, well, there we are. That is an exploration of the benefits of cycling for running. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Please do hit follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, and do check out the website as well as the YouTube channel for our athlete stories and interviews on there, because they're pretty cool. I'm biased, but they are pretty cool. And the people that we work with are also pretty cool. So I'm not going to say that if you don't work with us, you're not cool, but the link to our website is down below is all I'm going to say. So there we are. Thank you for listening, everyone. We will see you next time.